Hello everybody and welcome to my video on how I made my trim router sled for my woodworking lathe. I use this to do fluting and cove cuts and other decorative features. I've made a couple multi-purpose tool handles as well as a few other items with it. It's ideal for smaller items. I made some hexagonal pin blanks with it using the indexing feature on my lathe as well. I have here my Mark 1 prototype, and it works. It was a lot of just figuring it out. There's a little bit of loose tolerance on it, and it was early woodworking. But it's used to mount my little Ryobi battery-operated trim router and allow the slide on the lathe bed to allow cutting along the side. And yes, I do have the battery removed. So I made a Mark II, and I went a little overboard with that. It's a bit more complex than it needs to be. So I moved on to a somewhere in between. I've added an additional feature. Not only can I move it along the sled, I can move it forward and back some with the indexing feature on the trim router, but also I'll have the ability built into the base of the sled to make larger movements in and out for larger work pieces. And then I added a feature to allow me to move on the y-axis as well. Oh, I'm sorry, the y-axis. Z-axis being forward and back. And I plan on putting together an Instructable and including a PDF of the design I've used and the measurements I've used. But I'm also putting together this video because sometimes it's a little easier to explain what you're doing if you've got something to see as well. So what we have here, we're going to have the base of the sled, and it's going to have two reinforcement beams on either side. All of this was cut from one piece of hobby wood, red oak from a big box store. I could have made these a little taller. My plans are going to show these at 1.5 inches, like the other support rails for the other for the riser or the upright. These same grain pattern, but it's going to change the direction of it, so it'll help with stability a little bit. But it also adds a little monolithic to it and will help support the upright as well. And then I'll have the actual sled that will fit into the between the bed of the lathe to allow it to slide across the x-axis. For these, everybody's router is going to be a little bit specific. Everybody's lathe is going to be a little bit specific. So take the measurements with a grain of salt and use what's best for you. Make sure you measure it to it works out for how you want it. To get these recessed, I used carriage bolts. I have a 2.5 inch and 1.5 inch. And to get these in, I drilled out the 3/8 inch hole, fed it in, and then using a washer, a wing nut, and a pair of pliers, I tighten down on this until it recesses itself. You have to be careful with that because it could potentially split the wood. It would be a little bit less risky for the wood if you were to shape that out first, mortise it. But I went this route. I was willing to take the risk because I had quite a bit of this piece. This is the only piece that did not come out of this one 4-foot 3/4 inch hobby board. I bought a separate piece for this that was larger, 2 inch by 2 inch I believe, and then shaped it down to what I needed for my lathe. So, quick synopsis. These supports will go on the side of the sled. the upright. Make sure I've got it facing the right direction. It should be like that. We'll go in here, and then it will have two of its braces. Everything will be screwed together using what I had available, which are these T15 1-inch multi-purpose screws. I'm also planning on gluing this, so these will allow me to do the testing of it to make sure it worked the way I wanted it to, but also to help bind it together provide the clamping force while the glue is setting. And I'll be doing that here, but I'll be fast forwarding through that part. And then of course this piece will go up through the bottom, through these slots. And then we have this one additional piece here. This is actually what the router is going to get attached to. This is the big difference between my Mark 1 and my Mark 3. So the type of screw you're going to need is depend on your trim router, but make sure you recess this so that the head sits flush, because then this is going to ride flush on that. And then your bolts will go through here to allow it to mount in here, and then you can attach your trim router to it. But let's go ahead and speed up the frame rate, and I'll go ahead and put this together. Alright, now that I've got that glued up and I've got that piece of pecan I was working off sealed, and go over some of the details here. So you can see we've got the sled, the two support rails, we've got the upright and its two support rails. This is the piece that the trim router will mount on. We'll go over that tomorrow after this is dried in a little more detail to show some of the things I have learned on how to safely operate this thing. And that's a nice compression fit there. So I routed these out. As you can see, some of my not quite proficiency in the routing department there. Fortunately, I had everything tightened down well, so when that did happen, it really didn't go far. This piece I actually mortised out with a Forstner bit, and that's just a 1-inch diameter to allow varying types of router bits to be used. And we'll use a couple flat washers. I do not recommend the wing nuts for up here. When you install them, they will actually get in the way of the router bit. So I've got a couple, if I can use my hands properly. Let me get that snugged on there with the wing nut. There we go. And pull the carriage bolts back into the upright slide on the back. And then we can use this just to tighten them down when we're in a position where we want to be maintained. So during my testing, I went ahead and checked, and my 0 mark is right there. So when I'm there and I've got a V groove bit on the router bit, it'll touch my into my center, and I can tighten on there, and I'll keep it from moving up and down at all. Doesn't take a lot of force. With as tight as that fit is, doesn't take much at all. And that's just some stick-on measuring tape, so I can measure myself plus or minus from a 0 point, which I couldn't find good measuring tape without numbers, so it is what it is. Same thing down here. These two grooves are routed out, 3/8" channels for the carriage bolts. These will feed through into their respective recesses. And that just mounts on the bottom there. Once again, down here is not such a problem with the wing nuts, but I am just going to tighten these in place, pull those carriage bolts up into where it needs to go, and then swap them out for these that I made with this sled. There's actually a piece of cedar round that I already had, and I cut it out with a cove bit and the V groove, sand it out. Still need to clean these up a little bit more. Just shaped and then cut off the pieces I needed for each of these. Provide a nice little knurled grip on there. Now, the big difference between Mark 1 and Mark 3, as I said, was this ability to move the router up and down on the y-axis. But because I've added that extra 3/4 inch thickness, I had to use an extender to reach through and still have enough extension out past to be a usable tip. It's not a lot, and we'll see that tomorrow when I get it hooked up. I'm not going to put one I ordered off of Amazon because honestly I'm not too impressed with this one. It takes 2 different wrench sizes, neither wrench that it came with. So it's different than the collet on my router, so it's a pain to change out the router bits. But it is what it is. I might get a new one at some point in time, but for right now it's what I have and it works. Last little thing on putting this together for until tomorrow is a hook down here at the end. Now you may notice that this bed extends out this way, which will be behind the lathe quite a bit more than it really needs to. And the whole point behind that is to provide a little bit of counterbalance, because once that router's on here, it's going to provide a great deal of back weight on here. I've actually got it set up where my batteries aren't going to be in the router. I've got an extension cord for them that I made with 2 adapters, and the battery's going to hang off of here just to balance it out just a little bit. Just in case I don't cover over all the details tomorrow when I'm using this, one of the big things you need to take into account is while you're using it, push down. And then also pull to the back of the lathe so that it is firmly set against this corner here, and that will allow for consistent cuts. And you'll also see that I'll start off in a position, move one way, and then move back, and what that'll do is on the second pass it'll help clear out any chatter I may have had from the first run, just because it's a handmade tool. It's not exactly a precision instrument, but for woodworking it provides nice results. So we will get back to that tomorrow and run through how to use the router bit in a show and tell, other than the one piece here and my two current videos, one on hexagonal pin blanks and the other one on multi-purpose tool handle, where I used that router sled already, or the Mark 1 I should say. And I will see y'all then. Okay, welcome back. It's the next day. I've got the jig set up. I've set my Z-axis depth so that my 0 point is touching this 3/4 inch offset. Then I backed it out a little bit so that I can cut into, there we go, get a depth of cut along this line. Battery as a counterweight. You'll notice that there's just a little bit of wobble. I think I need to flatten out the base of this sled a little bit more, but part of that is going to be controlled with me holding down here and pulling this way, so two forces, and then supporting on the back side of the router here. And I've given myself a little bit of gap here so that I can start and stop the router bit safely. I give myself a nice tailstock length here so that I have room to move. And this is actually going to stop when it comes up against my tool rest banjo, but I'll be keeping an eye out here. The intent is to take it down about 3/4 of an inch away from the end. Plan on this being a tool handle, and the end here I'm also going to flush cut into a 7/8 inch hex adapter onto the bronze ferrule. Alright, safety, make sure you aware you've got rotating equipment, everything's securely fastened, keep your hands away from it, as well as loose clothing. I'm going to have my dust collection going, and this is going to be noisy. I'll be wearing hearing protection, and I'll be adjusting the volume for this part. This is just to show how it's being used and how I've figured out how to use it safely. Make sure all my fittings are snug, and then I'll be fast forwarding through the working, and flip it over, and I'll do that end as well. I do have my lathe turned off to keep it from turning while I am using the indexing feature. Alright, so I took that down just a little bit further than I wanted to. 7/8 is a little loose on it, but it'll still work. So all I have left now is I got to drill it out and shape it into a tool handle, and I'll show off what it looks like at the end. I do have other videos on how to make these multi-purpose tool handles, so if you want to see how to do that, you can go watch that video. And if you don't wait around for the end product, just leave a comment, let me know what you think, anything I could do better, and if you think there's somebody else there who could use one of these, be sure to share it with them. Thank you much, and y'all have a great day. Alright, I have finished the tool handle using the router jig. As I said, I am going to try and get the instructions or the drawings for it, probably as an Instructables, or I will find some way of getting that updated so people can use them if they so desire. Like I said before, it's going to be dependent upon your trim router and your actual lathe. I've got a jet that I made this fit to. But if you got any comments, suggestions, feedback, or if you think you could share this, by all means. I'm all good with anything constructive that can be provided. So everybody out there, I think I said this already, but have a great day. Thank you.